I'm heading out now. Just make sure you don't do anything unnecessary, Sean said to Yosef, his tone firm. Sean was leaving for a company trip today. As the front door slammed shut with a loud bang, Yosef flinched and clenched his hands tightly. This alone was enough to understand how Sean usually treated Yosef. Knowing Sean would be away for a while, we felt a momentary sense of relief. I was about to head to the living room to prepare breakfast when Yosef tugged sharply at the hem of my clothes. I had never experienced this before, so I turned to him, a bit surprised, and our eyes met.
Mom, actually,
Yosef said hesitantly, extending his hand towards me. In his hand was a smartphone, which I don't recall buying for him, displaying something shocking on the screen. I quickly snatched the phone from Yosef's hand and stared intently at the photo displayed.
Where did you get this?
Yosef just pursed his lips and remained silent. Encouraging him that it's all right to speak, he began to reveal something unbelievable. My name is Tessa Stevens, a 32-year-old employee. I married Sean 3 months ago. I influenced mainly by his persistent approach. Our meeting goes back a year ago. Sean had come to my office in New York to do business, and I happened to be the one who dealt with him. Our office doesn't have a receptionist, so whoever is free at the moment handles visitors. This wouldn't be the case in other departments, but in administration, where I work, we tend to do a bit of everything. Sean needed to see someone from the sales department, but they were all busy that day. So, while handling his queries, I continued with my work. However, Sean kept talking to me, undeterred. Sitting on the sofa in the waiting area, sipping tea meant for visitors, he kept initiating conversation with me, visible from his seat. As this continued, we gradually grew closer. Every time Sean came for business, he would chat with me and leave with a smile. One day, he asked me out for dinner with a serious look, and I couldn't refuse. That was 6 months ago, and since then, we've been going out for meals frequently, getting to know each other better. It was during these dinners that he told me about Yosef. Sean's ex-wife had passed away, and he was worried about Yosef being alone. Hearing this, I wanted to help in any way I could, and I was the one who proposed marriage. After getting to know Yosef and bonding with him, we finally got married 3 months ago. After we got married, I noticed a change in Yosef's behavior. He began apologizing to me daily, but whenever I asked why, he would just clam up. What surprised me more was the drastic change in Sean's demeanor after our marriage. Before, he was undeniably a gentleman, kind and cheerful. But post-marriage, he became rough and brash. He was clumsy, loud in his actions, and spoke harshly. If he wanted something from me, he would call me over abruptly and speak in a commanding tone.
Hey, isn't the meal ready yet? I'm tired from work, you know.
Despite me being tired from work as well, he never showed any inclination to help. He treated me like a servant and was harsh with Yosef too.
Hey, don't mess up the house. You know those little parts hurt when stepped on.
He would kick away the blocks Yosef was playing with, destroying his creations. And then yell at him for showing a downtrodden attitude. Naturally, when I tried to discuss Yosef's habit of apologizing, Sean would dismiss it.
Hey, about Yosef's habit of apologizing. Geez, I'm exhausted from work. Don't bother me with such trivial stuff,
he would say, shutting down the conversation. This kind of exchange happened several times, each time ending with him being annoyed and yelling at me. Finally, I lost my patience.
Don't you care about your own child?
I confronted him. Sean just shrugged his shoulders wearily and said in a patronizing tone,
He's not your biological child, so don't worry about it.
His response was off the mark, considering I married him knowing about Yosef. As I was about to retort, my eyes drifted towards the living room door. To my surprise, Yosef was silently watching us through the gap. Realizing this, I swallowed my words, and Yosef quickly left the room. Sean, oblivious to this, thought he had won the argument and smirked before heading to his room. I barely slept that night, but morning still came. I sluggishly got out of bed and started preparing breakfast. I wasn't doing it for Sean. He didn't even eat breakfast, preferring to skip it stubbornly. I made breakfast for Yosef, and my own meal was just an afterthought. Yet, Sean would always complain when he saw me preparing it.
Are you really gonna feed him something so greasy this early? It'll cause heartburn, stop it.
Sean complained with a disgusted look as he watched me frying small pieces of potatoes. I was about to continue our conversation from the previous day when Yosef appeared in the living room, just as Sean was leaving. As soon as Sean was out of sight, Yosef looked up at me and apologized. "Mom, I'm sorry," he muttered sadly. I turned off the gas and met his eyes, determined to understand the reason behind his apologies today. I thought today was the day to firmly understand the meaning behind Yosef's apologies.
You don't have to apologize for anything. Hey, why do you always say sorry? You haven't done anything wrong, right?
I asked him, looking puzzled, but Yosef just shook his head repeatedly without saying a word. Then Sean came back into the living room, and Yosef quickly started helping with the breakfast preparation. No matter how many times I asked, Yosef never explained why he apologized. Initially, Yosef didn't start out apologizing to me like this, it developed over time. Yosef's habit of apologizing to me started about a month after I married Sean. He often apologized when Sean wasn't looking, and at first, I tried earnestly to get more details from him. But every time, Yosef would dodge the question or act as if nothing had happened. Moreover, it seemed like he had been scolded by Sean a few times over this, and now he only apologized when Sean wasn't around. I was troubled by Yosef's reluctance to explain the reason, despite my repeated attempts to ask. Once again, it didn't go well, and I sighed quietly while preparing breakfast, following Yosef's lead. Sean had already finished getting ready for work and seemed uninterested in us. Considering what had happened the day before, I doubted Yosef would talk even after Sean left for work. I sighed heavily, feeling disheartened as I watched Sean leave for work, and then Yosef and I ate breakfast. After dropping Yosef off at daycare, I was left to ponder over his apologies on my way to work. As I walked to the office, lost in thought, I reached to take out my employee ID. I noticed something unfamiliar in my bag.
What's this?
I found a crumpled piece of paper, apprehensively unfolded it, and saw it was written in a child's handwriting. I immediately recognized it as Yosef's.
I'll definitely talk next time.
Reading those earnestly written words, I felt a twinge of anxiety. Yosef, who had never talked before, was now determined to speak up. I was relieved, yet couldn't shake off a feeling of unease as I headed to work. Then it struck me. Oh, Sean will be away on a company trip soon. On second thought, it was a natural course of events. Sean was scheduled to go on a business trip soon, leaving the house empty, so there would be no interruptions. This meant Yosef could talk to me about everything without the fear of being scolded by Sean. Realizing this, things made more sense, and I focused on my work with a newfound clarity. As the day Sean was leaving the house approached, I felt a bit of relief. Watching him pack his bags cheerfully the day before, I noticed he was in a good mood. Usually, he would nitpick over the smallest things, but not this time. This alone made a big difference in my mood, but Yosef seemed different. He looked like he had made up his mind about something and was very quiet. On that day, Sean was set to leave earlier than usual. A little while after we woke up, Yosef got up hesitantly.
I'm heading out now. Just make sure you don't do anything unnecessary,
Sean said to Yosef as he left for his company trip. The sound of the front door slamming shut made Yosef flinch and he clenched his hands tightly. Just from this, it was clear how Sean usually treated Yosef. When I said good morning and took a closer look at Yosef, I saw he was on the verge of tears.
What's wrong? Oh, did Daddy scare you just now?
It probably wasn't just about being yelled at as Sean was leaving. Sean has a habit of complaining right away when he encounters something. So, even on a day like this, I thought he must have complained when he ran into Yosef. Knowing that Sean would be away for a while, we felt a brief sense of relief. As I was about to prepare breakfast in the living room, Yosef tugged at the hem of my clothes. I was a bit surprised, as he had never done that before, but I met his gaze. However, Yosef contradicted my words and apologized while on the verge of tears.
I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry.
As Yosef cried and tears fell, I hugged him and waited for him to calm down. Although it sounds bad, I thought this was a good opportunity to ask in detail.
You always apologize, but what happened? You put a letter in my bag the other day, right? Are you going to talk about it today?
I asked gently with a smile. Yosef nodded repeatedly, almost sobbing, and said,
I have something I've been keeping from Mom. I've wanted to tell you for a long time, but I was scared of getting scolded by Dad. I couldn't say it, but I had to.
Yosef tried to hold back his tears as he spoke. But he was overwhelmed and couldn't get his words out right. He cried again, and I gently stroked his head, waiting patiently. Rushing Yosef wouldn't help, and it would only make him more anxious. Now that Sean was gone, I could focus on Yosef without any distractions. I even thought about taking the day off from work and skipping daycare. I'll definitely talk next time. I wondered what Yosef had been feeling when he put those words in my bag, and I knew confirming this was my priority. As I pondered this, Yosef seemed to calm down a bit. He was still hiccuping a little, but he had reached a state where he could talk. When he finally spoke and showed me something, I was stunned. "Mom, actually, Yosef said timidly, extending his hand towards me. In his hand was a smartphone I didn't remember buying for him, and on the screen was something unbelievable. I quickly snatched the smartphone from Yosef's hand and stared intently at the photo on the screen. "What's this?" I asked. Yosef clamped his lips shut and remained silent. Encouraging him that it's all right to speak, he began to reveal something astonishing. "This is a picture of my previous mom." At his words, my eyes widened. Sean had told me before we married that his ex-wife had passed away. If that wasn't true, it meant Sean had been lying to me all this time. I trembled as I looked back and forth between the photo on the smartphone and Yosef, trying to make sense of the situation. Then, one particularly troubling thought came to mind, and I asked Yosef, "Where did this photo come from? And why do you have this phone?" I intended to ask as calmly as possible, but the overwhelming situation made me anxious. Perhaps my tone came across as slightly accusatory. Yosef, excited again, struggled to explain. "Well, it's from before. And Dad gave it to me, for playing games, you know." I felt bad for sounding harsh, but Yosef was getting worked up and wasn't making much sense. To calm both of us down, I decided we should move to the living room and sit on the sofa. After a while, when both of us had calmed down, I decided to ask more about it. First, I made sure to call the office and the daycare to face this situation head-on without any distractions. This way, not only was Sean gone, but I also had no time constraints to focus on Yosef. So, I started by asking about the smartphone Yosef had. "Let me ask again, where did this smartphone come from? You said earlier that Dad gave it to you, right?" "Yes, Dad gave it to me. It's his old phone, he gave it to me to play games on." "I see, so it was Sean's old phone given to Yosef as a gaming device. That explains why Yosef had a smartphone I never bought for him." Satisfied with this explanation, I proceeded to ask about the photo I had seen earlier. "So, what about the picture you showed me earlier? What did you mean by previous mom?" "It was in the phone, in a folder with other pictures. It's a picture of my previous mom, not you, Mom." I couldn't quite grasp it at first, so I turned on the smartphone I had snatched from Yosef. Instead of the photo, the screen showed a folder with stored photos. Ah, so the photos were in a digital album in the phone. Understanding this, I started browsing through the folder to see if there were any similar photos. Then I found it. A video dated last month, the day Sean said he was late due to a long meeting. I impulsively played the video to see what it showed. It depicted a man and a woman in an intimate act, and the man's voice was unmistakably Sean's. The only saving grace was that the phone's volume was low, so the sound was barely audible. I turned to look at Yosef. He was biting his lip, trying to hold back tears. I threw the phone aside and hugged Yosef, soothing his back gently. That's all I could do. Yosef had probably seen this video. I knew a child's curiosity was unstoppable. "I didn't like it. The voice on the TV wasn't Mom's voice." Yosef started crying again, and all I could do was hold him and nod in understanding. Of course, a 5-year-old like Yosef wouldn't understand what the act in the video meant. But he knew the voice was his father's, and the woman's voice wasn't mine. That must have saddened him. When I asked Dad about it, he got really angry and told me not to tell Mom. The smartphone belonged to Sean. So Yosef must have asked Sean about the video and photos. Maybe he innocently asked who the person in the video was. Naturally, Sean would have been furious, scolding Yosef and warning him not to tell me. Because of this, Yosef realized he had seen something he shouldn't have. Apologizing is what you do when you've done something wrong. But he couldn't tell me the reason. After all, Sean had been harsh with him, and despite being married to me, he was still involved with his ex-wife. It seems that Yosef was troubled by the idea of telling me about such things. Understanding all this, I held Yosef even tighter in my arms. Perhaps I was trying to keep the anger boiling inside me from showing on the surface. The fact that Sean had lied to me, involved Yosef in this mess, and was unfaithful with his ex-wife while married to me. These thoughts were boiling in my stomach, and my mind gradually grew colder. Careful not to scare Yosef, I made a request.
Hey, Yosef. It's okay to be angry with me later, but could you come with me now?
Hearing my words, Yosef nodded repeatedly in agreement.
It's okay, I'm fine. I want to be with Mom because Dad is scary. I want to stay with Mom.
Yosef pleaded earnestly. I smiled reassuringly at him and encouraged him to go wash his face. Watching Yosef obediently follow my instructions, I began to ponder my plan for revenge against my husband. It would have been different if it was just about me. But the fact that he could hurt his own son, Yosef, and remain unbothered was unthinkable. Yosef might not be my biological son, but I love him as if he were. He used to smile so much when we first met, but since the marriage, his smiles have been rare. It's heartbreaking to know that he blames himself for the troubles caused by his father's infidelity. I pondered what would be the best course of action moving forward. Perhaps making my husband fully atone for his actions would be best, but what preparations would be necessary for that? And is there anyone I can truly rely on? As I thought about it, I remembered someone. However, I immediately dismissed the idea. If they were blood relatives, there might be a chance, but with in-laws, it's uncertain whose side they would take. What if they sided with my husband and harmed Yosef? Perhaps I could manage on my own. I was initially set on solving this alone, but I realized it was better to seek help. With that in mind, I quickly reached for my phone to make a call. I became restless as the call went unanswered. Meanwhile, Yosef returned from the washroom, looking curiously at me. I gestured for him to be quiet, placing my index finger in front of my lips. And silently mouthed a shoo, finally getting a response on the phone. A few days later, when my husband returned from his business trip, I immediately went out to meet him and told him we needed to talk.
Hey, can't you see? I'm exhausted from a long trip. It's about Yosef, right? Let's talk another time.
With these words, my husband tried to evade the conversation, but I was determined not to let him off the hook. I didn't know where he had been all this time. But I knew with whom he had been. Since Sean returned late, Yosef was not present at that moment. So, I could confront Sean without any reservations.
That's not going to work. It's not just about Yosef, there's more. Don't think you can escape this.
I said firmly, a tone I had never used with Sean before. His brow furrowed as he turned to face me.
What's with that tone? It's really irritating. I'll say it again, I'm tired. Let's talk later.
He spoke in a deep voice, trying to intimidate me and make me back down. But I wasn't going to be swayed by such tactics now.
You think you can put this off? Unfortunately for you, I've heard everything from Yosef on the morning you left.
Sean's face contorted at my words. That makes sense. From what I heard, Sean had angrily shouted at Yosef, telling him not to say anything to me. He probably never expected Yosef to end up telling me. But it wasn't something to be blamed for. Yosef, understanding the situation, had been apologizing to me every day. Those apologies were probably not just meant for me.
What's that? I didn't hear about it. Where did he go? Is he in the bedroom? Has he gone to bed?
Sean looked around for Yosef. However, Yosef wasn't in the house. Given the situation I was dealing with, I had anticipated this might happen. I had already sent Yosef to my parents' house for safety.
You can search all you want, he's not here. Knowing you would look for him, I've sent him to my parents' house.
Hearing this, Sean stopped in his tracks and turned to face me. He approached me slowly, grabbed my shoulders, and shook me.
You saw it, didn't you? You saw it. If you heard that story, it means you saw it.
As my husband violently shook me, I endured it, feeling terrified. Compared to the fear Yosef had been living with, this was nothing.
Isn't this a violation of privacy, even between spouses? Did you tell him to show it to you? Right, I told him never to tell you, not to show it.
I was filled with fear as Sean, still shaking me, inched closer despite my efforts to break free. Thinking of how Yosef must have felt made me want to apologize on his behalf.
Your privacy is less important than the emotional wounds you've inflicted on Yosef. That's far more serious. What's with all this about Yosef? Treat me with respect. Show me some consideration.
Sean yelled, stomping his feet like a child, which made me wonder who between him and Yosef was the actual child. His words, revealing his true feelings, were so immature that I was dumbfounded.
If you want respect, then act in a way that earns it. Lying about your ex-wife being dead, deceiving me, and cheating. And then telling your own child to keep quiet about your affair trip.
What do you think of us?
So, you really know everything, huh? I thought maybe you didn't understand since Yosef talked about it. If you're going to say so much, then it's divorce. There's no choice but to divorce. My husband began, to which I coldly agreed. That's exactly what I want. But you do realize, you're going to pay a substantial amount in alimony for hurting Yosef. I stated firmly, presenting him with the half-completed divorce papers.
Sean's face turned pale at the sight. Apparently, he thought he could escape while I or he was getting the divorce papers. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I pressured him to finish writing his part. Overwhelmed by my determination, my husband reluctantly agreed to write, but he insisted, as if he wouldn't budge on this one thing.
I'm taking custody of Yosef. That's final.
Don't be ridiculous, I'm never giving you custody.
I retorted, as he began to argue that Yosef was his child and he should have custody.
But I firmly refused to agree and snatched the completed divorce papers before rushing out of the house. Sean followed, but I quickly left through the front door, heading straight to my parents' house. My parents' house is located very close to our house. My parents were still alive and well, and when I brought Yosef back to them and told them everything, my father was furious. When I returned with the divorce papers, Yosef was already asleep, and my mother looked anxious. Then there was my father, who was extremely angry. I showed him the divorce papers, and we discussed the future plans until dawn. As the sky began to lighten, we had a plan in place and decided to catch some sleep. Yosef was sleeping in my old room at my parents' house. Watching him sleep, I reaffirmed my resolve. As soon as public institutions opened, I, along with my family, went to various places. First, we went to the office to submit the divorce papers, then looked for a lawyer. With my parents' help, we found a good lawyer and submitted evidence and testimony with Yosef. After everything was reviewed, it was decided to confront Sean in person. When Sean arrived at the lawyer's office, he looked around for Yosef.
Don't bother looking.
He's not here. Sean's face soured at my words as he reluctantly faced the lawyer. The lawyer informed him that his chances of getting custody were slim. Sean started to lose his temper at the office.
Why is it difficult? He's my son. Think about what you've done before saying that. Don't you even feel like apologizing?
I countered. Sean began to get really angry, and he was taken to another room. As I continued talking with the lawyer, Sean started causing a commotion in the other room, leading us to call the police. While waiting for the police, Sean kept making noise. I started to feel embarrassed, wondering how I ended up with such a person. Ignoring the attempts of other lawyers and paralegals to stop him, Sean burst into the room where I was. Just as he was about to get violent, the police arrived. At that moment, Sean was almost detained for assault. However, he struggled and ended up hitting a police office, adding obstruction of justice to his charges, and was finally taken to the police station. After the storm-like presence of Sean was gone, the law office informed me they had no intention of representing him. That was to be expected. I felt apologetic and helped clean up the disrupted office. While doing so, my parents and Yosef, who had been sheltered in another room, came out. Yosef's eyes were red as if he had been crying. Despite my intentions, he had been frightened again. However, he joined us in tidying up, his eyes still red. Praised by my parents and others, Yosef's smile returned. For the first time, I felt like I saw a genuine smile from him. Sean was eventually released from police custody, but of course, he lost the custody of Yosef. The in-laws came to pick him up, but they were cold towards him after hearing everything from me. Additionally, Sean faced the burden of paying alimony and a hefty fine. I had sent a certified letter to Sean's company about the incident, resulting in his dismissal. Now, even though he was released and wanted to work, the company had turned its back on him. Furthermore, it seemed he was disowned by his in-laws and couldn't afford the mortgage on his house. Sean needs money to pay the alimony, bail, and his house mortgage, but he doesn't have a steady job. In this state of misfortune, one wonders what he plans to do next. Although Sean received financial punishment, I wasn't ready to forgive him just yet. I obtained a restraining order from the lawyer, keeping Yosef safe from the threat of Sean. It seems that Sean was furious when he found out, but apparently, he didn't want to get in trouble with the police again and seemed to have given up. He quietly returned to his usual day labor jobs, working to repay everything that had fallen upon him. The lawyer informed me of this. Honestly, I didn't care much, but knowing what he was doing gave me a sense of security. Finally free from Sean's oppression, we felt a sense of relief. However, there was still a lingering issue. Sean's ex-wife, whom he claimed had passed away. The lawyer's investigation revealed she had separated from Sean before he approached me. The cause of their separation was reportedly the ex-wife's extravagant spending habits. However, it seems that once they were apart, Sean, as a husband, didn't seem to be bothered by that anymore. Still, this doesn't justify him being unfaithful while married to me. My main priority had always been Yosef over a relationship that had long lost its warmth. I had considered taking action against the ex-wife, but I didn't want to expose Yosef to more conflict. To me, Yosef was like my own son, blood-related or not. I'd rather think of him as my adopted child than anything to do with Sean and his family. With the divorce finalized, Yosef was now truly free. Even though he still had a habit of apologizing, he was gradually starting to smile more. Going forward, with the help of my parents, I planned to enjoy a happy life with just Yosef and me, believing that his habit of apologizing would eventually fade away.